The champagne hasn't been poured yet. The cork is still in. But in 2 hours, that same gold liquid will be pouring, not spilling, pouring, slow, deliberate, straight onto a man's chest. Rewind. A man walks into the airport. Plain sweater. Worn leather duffel. No entourage. Nobody turns to look. Nobody knows who he is. That's exactly how he wants it. A flight attendant, with 12 years on the job, glances down the first-class aisle. Her eyes catch on one seat. 1 second too long. A decision gets made, in under 10 seconds, that nobody on that plane understands the weight of yet. 37,000 feet up. No way out. And 6 strangers, who are about to find out that silence has a price too. Under a plain gray sweater, something is about to break. The plane hasn't taken off yet. The champagne is still corked. Vanessa Cole hasn't smiled at anyone yet. But she will. And then she'll stop. Rewind 2 hours. Because that's where this actually starts. Not at 30,000 feet. Not with a bottle turned upside down, over a man's lap. It starts on the ground. In a terminal that smells like burnt coffee and jet fuel. Where nobody knows who's walking through the door. Elijah Monroe walks through the door. No entourage. No sunglasses. No security detail clearing a path through the crowd like he's Moses at the Red Sea. Just a man in a gray wool coat, 34 years old, carrying a leather duffel that's seen better decades. He looks like an accountant who's late for something. Or a schoolteacher on winter break. Or nobody at all. Which is exactly the point. Hartsfield-Jackson International. Terminal F, 6:40 in the evening. The check-in counter for Sterling Wing Airlines sits at the far end, past the marble columns, past the digital board flickering arrival times and soft blue light. A woman behind the desk, mid-40s, name tag that says Patricia, glances up as he approaches. Doesn't recognize him. Why would she? Evening, sir. Checking a bag? No. Just this. He sets the duffel on the scale. Doesn't say anything else. Doesn't need to. She scans his passport. And something happens to her face. A small thing. A flicker. Like a light bulb deciding whether to stay on or die. Mr. Monroe. He nods. Once. She straightens. Actually straightens, spine snapping like she's back in basic training. Seat 2A is ready for you, sir. Your usual. He doesn't smile. Doesn't need to do that either. Thank you, Patricia. She blinks. Because he read her name tag. Because he said her name like she was a person, and not a uniform. Small thing. But it lands. It always lands. He walks away from the counter. Toward the security line. Toward the gate. And Patricia stands there for one more second, watching him go, thinking the same thought every single employee at Sterling Wing thinks the first time they meet him in person. That's him. That's actually him. Because here is what you need to understand about Elijah Monroe, before anything else happens tonight. He owns this airline. All of it. 51% to be exact, though the number stopped mattering to him around the 3rd year. He became CEO at 29. Majority shareholder by 31. The youngest man to run a major American carrier in the history of American carriers. And almost nobody outside a boardroom has ever seen his face. No magazine covers. He turned those down. 3 of them. A national business magazine tried twice. No interviews. No podcast appearances. No panel discussions, where men in expensive shoes talk about disruption and vertical integration, while a moderator nods along like it means something. His photograph exists in exactly 2 places on Earth. His employee badge. And a single framed picture in a boardroom in Manhattan, that most of his own staff have never set foot in. He likes it that way. Because there's a difference. A real one. Between the airline a company says it runs, and the airline it actually runs. Between the training manual and the truth. Between what corporate promises in a press release, and what happens in row 14, when nobody with a badge is watching. Elijah wanted to know the difference. So 4 years ago he started doing this. Buying his own ticket under his own name, never hiding the name. That would be dishonest, and dishonesty was never the point, and just sitting there, watching, listening. A man in a plain sweater, with tired eyes, scrolling nothing on his phone, absorbing everything around him. 14 flights. 14 times he's done this. 12 of them were fine. More than fine. Crews who treated every passenger like they mattered, because that's what they'd been trained to do, and, more importantly, that's who they actually were underneath the training. One flight had a baggage issue. Minor. Fixed within a week. One flight had a gate agent, who was short, with an elderly passenger. Rude, not cruel. Retrained. Given a second chance, because everyone deserves exactly one of those. Tonight will be flight 15. And tonight will not be fine. He doesn't know that yet. Nobody knows that yet. Which is the terrible, aching thing about tonight, that it's still, for these next few minutes, just an ordinary evening. A man boarding a plane. That's all it is. Until it isn't. The jet bridge to first class smells like vanilla and old leather. Ascend Elijah picked out himself, 18 months ago, sitting in a windowless room, with a fragrance consultant, who kept saying the word aspirational, until it stopped meaning anything. He steps into the cabin. 8 seats. Cream leather. Warm amber lighting, the kind engineered to make 40-year-old men feel 25, and 25-year-old men feel like they've already made it. A woman in a cream blazer sits in 1A, thumb moving across her phone screen, without looking up. Doesn't register him. Fine. A silver-haired man occupies 3B. A folded newspaper, creased into quarters the way men of a certain generation fold newspapers, precise, practiced, unconscious. He glances up as Elijah passes. Just a glance. A nod exchanged between two men, who don't need conversation to acknowledge each other. That's Walter Higgins. 67 years old. Retired trial attorney. 40 years of courtroom instinct sitting behind a pair of gold-rimmed reading glasses that have slid halfway down his nose. Elijah doesn't know his name yet. Won't for another hour. But something about the man registers anyway. The stillness of him. The way he watches a room instead of just occupying it. 2 rows down, in 3A, a man with a military bearing sits, with his back straight enough to measure a wall against. Frank Ostrander. 71 years old. Retired colonel, United States Army. 26 years of service behind him, 3 decades of civilian life in front of him, and a face that has learned, the hard way, exactly what it costs a man to stay calm, when everything in him wants to stand up and shout. He's reading nothing. Just watching the cabin fill. Elijah slides into 2A. Buckles his belt. Sets his phone face down on the armrest. Seat 2C sits empty across the aisle. It'll stay that way the entire flight. Sterling Wing blocks it deliberately on this particular route. A scheduling quirk nobody thinks twice about, though tonight it means Elijah has no direct neighbor to his right. Only the aisle, and beyond it, Walter and Frank, close enough to see everything, far enough to need to choose whether to act on it. He looks out the window. The ground crew is loading luggage below, small men in orange vests moving in the floodlights like figures in a diorama. He watches them work. Thinks, for just a second, about his mother. Loretta Monroe. 31 years cleaning hotel rooms in Memphis. 31 years of other people's mess, other people's stains, other people's carelessness scrubbed out of carpets that were never going to say thank you. She used to come home smelling like bleach and somebody else's expensive perfume. Used to sit at the kitchen table at 11 at night, feet swollen, hands cracked from the chemicals, and still, ask him how his day went, before she'd let herself collapse into the chair. He was 11 years old the first time a classmate called him something ugly. Came home crying. Didn't even understand the word, just understood the shape of it, the way it was aimed. She didn't yell. Didn't call the school. Just pulled him into her lap even, though he was getting too big for laps, and said the thing she always said. The thing that lives in him now like a second heartbeat. Baby. The people who try to make you small already know you're bigger than them. That's why they're trying. Don't shrink. Don't shout. Just wait. The truth always shows up. It just takes its time. He was 11 then. He's 34 now. And in about 40 minutes, he's going to need every single word of that. Beside him, in 2B, a young mother is trying to fold a stroller, with one hand, while balancing a toddler on her hip. He reaches over, without a word, folds the mechanism for her, hands it back. She blinks at him. Thank you? Sure. That's it. That's the whole exchange. But it matters, because it's the last easy, ordinary human moment of the night, before things start sliding sideways. Because that's when Vanessa Cole enters the cabin. She doesn't walk in. She arrives. The way certain people arrive in a room like the room owes them an entrance fee. Navy vest, pressed so sharp it could cut. Silk scarf knotted at the throat, gold pin holding it exactly, precisely in place. Name badge polished to a mirror shine, Vanessa Cole, and beneath it, a small enamel bar denoting 12 years of service. 12 years. She'll say that number tonight like it's a weapon. Like it's a title. 12 years earned, 12 years owed, 12 years that apparently entitle her to decide, on sight, who belongs in this cabin, and who doesn't. She starts at row 1. Ms. Devereux, so good to have you back. The cream blazer woman finally looks up, smiles thin and automatic. Vanessa knows her name. Of course she does. Frequent flyer. Money that shows. Row 3. Colonel Ostrander. A small nod, respectful, almost warm. Mr. Higgins, that tie is doing you favors tonight. Walter chuckles despite himself. Can't help it. She's good at this. That's the unsettling part, she's actually good at this job, when she wants to be. Then she reaches row 2. And something in her face changes. It's subtle. If you weren't watching for it, you'd miss it entirely. A tightening around the eyes. A recalibration, like a machine quietly rejecting an input it doesn't recognize as valid. She looks at Elijah. Plain sweater, no tie, duffel bag stowed under the seat in front of him instead of the overhead bin, like a man, who doesn't trust airlines, with his belongings. No watch showing, the Avro chronograph is there, but tucked under his sleeve, invisible unless you're looking for it. Which she isn't. Because she's already decided what she's looking at. A young black man. Casual clothes. No entourage. Doesn't fit the frame. She gives him a short nod. No name, she hasn't looked at his ticket, doesn't know his name, won't ask, no greeting. Just motion. A box checked and moved past. Then she's gone, back up the aisle, warmth restored the instant she's out of his row like a light switching back on. Beside him, the young mother watches the whole exchange out of the corner of her eye. Says nothing. Adjusts the toddler on her hip, and looks away, the particular way people look away, when they've noticed something, and decided noticing is, as far as it's going to go. Elijah watches Vanessa retreat up the aisle. Doesn't say anything. Files it away. Because here's the thing about being invisible rich for 4 years running. You learn to read a room the way a surgeon reads an X-ray. You learn to spot the hairline fracture, before it becomes the break. And he just spotted one. 20 minutes pass. The safety video plays on seatback screens, that nobody watches. The captain's voice comes over the intercom, warm and practiced, something about cruising altitude, and a smooth flight to LaGuardia. The seatbelt sign clicks off, with a soft chime. Elijah closes his eyes for a second. Just a second. Opens them when he hears the cart. Vanessa rolls it out of the galley herself. Doesn't delegate this part. 3 bottles of Chateau Verlaine, 7 flutes already polished, and standing at attention on the top shelf like soldiers. Row 1 first. For you, Ms. Devereux. A pour, a smile, A small laugh at something the woman says that Elijah can't hear. Row 3. Colonel. A pour. A nod exchanged like a salute. Mr. Higgins, you as well? Please, Walter says, closing his book. A finger holding his place. She pours his glass. Full. Generous. The champagne catching the amber light, gold on gold. Then the cart moves. Past row 2. Doesn't slow. Doesn't glance. Elijah watches it roll by the way you'd watch a car run a red light in slow motion, the part of your brain that expects the world to make sense simply refusing, for one long second, to process what it's seeing. He raises a hand. Not aggressive. Not loud. The universal small gesture of a man asking to be seen. Excuse me, ma'am. I think you missed my row. Vanessa stops the cart. Not because she wants to. Because the entire cabin heard him say it. She turns. Slowly. And here's the thing about that slowness, it isn't patience. Patience doesn't need an audience. This is performance. She wants every eye in this cabin on her face, before she opens her mouth, because whatever she's about to say, she's already decided it's justified, and justified things deserve witnesses. She looks at him. The way a store clerk looks at a teenager, who just walked in wearing a hood and carrying a backpack. Already guilty. Already a problem. Already exhausting her patience, before she's spoken a single word to him. You didn't miss anything, ma'am, Elijah says. Voice level. Calm. I didn't miss anything. She sets the bottle down on the cart. Hard. Hard enough that the empty flutes rattle against each other, a small nervous chorus of glass. Champagne services for passengers who belong here. Belong. She lets the words sit in the air like smoke. Like she's daring somebody to breathe it in. Not freeloaders who scam their way into seats they can't afford. The cabin goes quiet. Not silent. Quiet is different. Quiet is when nobody's talking. This is something else. 6 other passengers simultaneously realizing they're watching something they shouldn't have to watch, and simultaneously realizing none of them are going to be the first to say so. The cream blazer woman lowers her phone an inch. Walter's eyes lift, over the rim of his glasses. The colonel doesn't move. Doesn't need to. His stillness has weight to it, the specific stillness of a man who's watched things go wrong before and knows the worst thing you can do in the first 30 seconds is react. Elijah's jaw tightens. 1 millimeter. That's it. That's the hotel. If you blinked, you missed it. Then it releases. And he reaches into his jacket pocket. Pulls out his boarding pass. Holds it up between 2 fingers, steady, unhurried. Seat 2A. First class. A pause. I'd like my champagne, please. Please. He says please. After everything she just said to him, in front of everyone, he says please, and somehow that word does more damage to her composure than an insult would have. Because insults, she knows how to survive. Politeness aimed back at her like a mirror, she does not. She doesn't take the boarding pass from his hand. She snatches it. The way you'd grab a flyer somebody's forcing on you outside a subway station. She holds it between thumb and forefinger, arm extended, like it's something that might stain her skin. Doesn't read it. Doesn't scan it. Doesn't even glance at it, really, just holds it up, lets 3 full seconds tick by in total silence, 3 seconds she's using to make absolutely sure every single passenger in this cabin is watching her decide what to do next. So does every thief. She tosses the pass back onto his lap. It lands next to the sliver of watch visible below his sleeve, though she doesn't notice that either. Doesn't look closely enough to notice anything real about him. Never has. Stolen credit cards. Fake bookings. She reaches into her vest pocket, produces a folded cloth napkin. I've been doing this 12 years, sir. 12. I know exactly what an upgrade scam looks like. She wipes the armrest beside him. Slowly. Deliberately. The exact spot her fingers brushed, when she grabbed his ticket, wiped clean like she's disinfecting a surface something dirty just touched. Elijah watches every stroke of that napkin. Doesn't flinch. Doesn't look away. Because there's a version of this moment where a man stands up. Where a man raises his voice, demands a manager, demands respect, demands the thing he's owed by every metric that should matter. And there's a version where a man does none of that. Sits there. Absorbs it. Lets it happen, because he already knows, with the calm, terrible certainty of somebody who has been here before, in different rooms, wearing different faces, that the moment will come back around, and it will come back around harder than anything he could say right now. He's choosing the second version. Because his mother taught him the second version works. You people, Vanessa says, tucking the napkin back into her vest, always want what isn't yours. And there it is. The line that ends this for her, though she doesn't know it yet. The line that will follow her, through an HR conference room, and a manila envelope, and a name badge surrendered on a jet bridge under fluorescent light. The cabin isn't quiet anymore. It's frozen. Different thing entirely. Quiet is absence. Frozen is 6 people simultaneously understanding they are watching something ugly happen in real time, and simultaneously choosing, for now, in this exact second, to do nothing about it. 6 people. And then one of them speaks. I've been sitting here, Walter Higgins says, for the last 5 minutes. He doesn't stand. Doesn't raise his voice. Closes his book, with one finger holding the page, sets it on the armrest, and looks at Vanessa, over the top of his gold-rimmed glasses. The voice of a man who spent 40 years cross-examining witnesses, and never once needed to shout to make them sweat. You poured champagne for every person in this cabin. You smiled at every one of them. You didn't check a single boarding pass. Not one. He pauses. Lets the math sit. And the only passenger you refused, insulted, and wiped your hands after touching. A small gesture toward Elijah, precise, almost surgical, happens to be the only black man on this plane. The cabin holds its breath. Vanessa's jaw sets. A muscle jumping at the hinge of it. Sir, this doesn't concern you. I'm a retired attorney. Walter says it the way another man might say I'm armed. Flat. Informational. A fact laid on the table for whoever wants to pick it up. Everything concerns me. 2 rows down, Colonel Ostrander sets his newspaper, untouched, unread the whole flight, onto his lap. Doesn't say anything yet. But something has shifted behind his eyes. Something old. Something that goes back further than this cabin, further than tonight, back to a different tarmac, a different decade, a different uniform. Because Frank Ostrander has been here before too. He'll tell that story soon. Not yet. Not while there's still air to hold his tongue for one more minute, still a chance the situation resolves itself, without needing his oldest, ugliest memory dragged into the light. But soon. Vanessa's eye twitches. Barely. She's not used to being challenged. Especially not by white passengers defending a black man she already decided doesn't belong in her cabin. It's not in her script. In her script, the other passengers side with her. Look at Elijah, and see exactly what she wants them to see. Stay quiet. Let her be right, the way she's been right for 12 years running, the way nobody has ever stood up in her galley, and told her, flatly, calmly, with the full authority of 40 years behind him, that she's wrong. Walter Higgins just tore that script in half. She stares at him for 2 full seconds. Then turns back to Elijah. Last chance. Voice sharper now, the professionalism cracking at the edges like ice under weight. Are you going to sit quietly, or do I need to call the captain and have you removed for disruptive behavior? Elijah doesn't answer. Doesn't look at her. Turns his head, slow, deliberate, toward the window. Toward the clouds sliding by below, soft and white, and utterly indifferent to what's happening in C2A. Hands folded in his lap. Breathing even. Face showing nothing. Nothing at all. She waits for a response. Doesn't get one. And that, the absence, the silence, The sheer refusal to acknowledge her existence lands harder than any shouted comeback ever could. Because Vanessa Cole has controlled every first-class cabin she's ever worked. 12 years of it. And right now, for the first time in longer than she can remember, she feels something she has no vocabulary for. Ignored. She straightens her vest, pushes the cart forward, and starts planning what she's going to do about it. For the next 10 minutes, Elijah does nothing. Doesn't press the call button. Doesn't demand the captain. Doesn't reach for his phone. Sits in 2A, with his hands folded, and his eyes on the window like Vanessa Cole never spoke a single word to him. Which, this is the part that unravels her, though she'd never admit it, is somehow worse than if he'd screamed. Because Vanessa knows how to handle anger. Angry passengers, she's had hundreds of them. Yelling, cursing, threatening lawsuits, letters to corporate, one-star reviews written in all caps at midnight. She knows the choreography of that fight. Knows how to play the wounded, hard-working flight attendant just trying to do her job against an unreasonable customer. Anger gives her a role. Silence gives her nothing. Silence just sits there. Doesn't argue back. Doesn't validate her performance. Just exists, calm and total, and makes her feel, for reasons she can't name, and refuses to examine, like she doesn't matter. For a woman who has spent 12 years believing she's the most important person in every cabin she's ever worked, that's unbearable. She retreats behind the galley curtain. Arms crossed. Jaw tight enough to ache. Nathan Price is back there, 29 years old, restocking the snack drawer, with the mechanical focus of a man trying very hard not to be noticed. "Did you see that?" Vanessa says. He looks up. "See what?" "The guy in 2A. Just sitting there. Won't talk. Won't move. Won't even look at me." She shakes her head, hard, like she's trying to dislodge the memory. "I told him champagne wasn't for him. Told him to his face. And you know what he did?" Nathan doesn't answer. Doesn't need to. Nothing. Just turned to the window. Like I'm invisible. Maybe he's trying to make me feel small, Nathan. That's what he's doing. She uncrosses her arms, points sharply toward the curtain. Go talk to him. Tell him he'd be more comfortable in economy. Use those exact words. Vanessa. His boarding pass says first class. I saw it when. I don't care what it says. Her voice drops. Low. Final. I'm lead crew in this cabin. If I say someone doesn't belong here, they don't belong here. Go. Nathan hesitates. Looks at the curtain. Looks back at her. Looks at his own shoes like they might have an opinion worth consulting. Then he goes. He walks to row 2, with the posture of a man delivering a diagnosis he doesn't believe in. Stops beside Elijah's seat. Hands clasped. Waits. Elijah doesn't turn. Sir? Nathan's voice cracks, just slightly, on the single syllable. I just wanted to let you know we have some open seats in economy. If you'd prefer a more comfortable experience. Elijah's head moves. An inch. Just enough to catch Nathan in the corner of his eye. I'm in my seat. 4 words. No anger in them. No sarcasm. Just a fact, delivered with the kind of quiet authority most people never manage to build in an entire lifetime, let alone summon under pressure in a plane cabin 30,000 feet above Georgia. Nathan stands there for 3 more seconds. Then retreats to the galley the way a dog retreats, after being sent to bark, and coming back, with its tail between its legs. Well? Vanessa's already waiting. He said he's in his seat. That's it. That's it. Her fingers curl around the edge of the galley counter. Knuckles going white. Above them, somewhere in the cabin, the captain's voice comes through the speakers, smooth, routine, something about cruising altitude, and weather over the eastern seaboard. Nobody in first class is listening. Walter Higgins is listening. To everything. He closed his book 7 minutes ago, and hasn't reopened it. Glasses low on his nose. eyes moving between Elijah and the galley curtain, with the slow, unhurried precision of a man who spent 4 decades watching people make the worst decisions of their lives, and knowing, well before they did, exactly where the decision was headed. He's seen this before. Not on a plane. In a courtroom. Same pattern every time. Someone in a position of small power gets challenged. They escalate instead of retreating, because retreating feels like losing, and losing in front of an audience is the one thing certain people cannot survive. And the other person, the one being wronged, doesn't fight back the way the aggressor expects. Doesn't fight back at all. Which only makes it worse. Because the aggressor, drunk on the momentum of their own certainty, does something unforgivable. Something that can't be walked back. Something that turns a bad moment into a career-ending one. Walter's seen it in witnesses about to perjure themselves. In defendants about to lunge across a table they know they shouldn't lunge across. In people who understand, somewhere beneath the adrenaline, that they're wrong, and go too far anyway, because stopping now would mean admitting it. He watches Vanessa reach for the Chateau Verlaine. The same bottle she refused to pour for Elijah. Watches her pull it off the cart by the neck. Watches her eyes fix on the curtain separating the galley from the cabin, watches something settle into her face that isn't quite decision and isn't quite madness, but sits somewhere uncomfortably between the two. "What are you doing?" Nathan asks. She doesn't answer. Straightens her vest. Adjusts her name badge. Picks up a fresh glass in her other hand. And walks out of the galley toward row 2. Nathan watches her go. Thinks about saying something. Thinks about stepping in front of her, physically, bodily, the way you'd step in front of a car about to hit a child. Thinks about a lot of things in the 2 seconds he has to think them. Does none of them. The bottle catches the amber cabin light as Vanessa walks. Gold liquid rocking gently, with each step, a small tide moving inside glass. Elijah is still looking out the window. Has no idea what's coming. She stops at row 1 first. Tops off the cream blazer woman's glass. The woman accepts, without looking up, from her phone, oblivious, cocooned in whatever screen is holding her attention. Row 3. Refills the colonel's glass. He shakes his head slightly, declines, watching her now, with the flat, assessing stillness of a man who's already decided he doesn't like where this is going. Then she reaches row 2. Walter looks up at her. He doesn't want more champagne. He wants to see what she's going to do. She doesn't acknowledge him. Eyes locked on Elijah. Still facing the window. Still motionless. Still breathing with the kind of unbothered calm that, for reasons she couldn't explain to a jury of her own making, is making her skin crawl. She pours Walter's glass anyway. Slowly. Deliberately. Buying time, or building courage, or both. Then she lifts the bottle. Turns toward Elijah. "You know," she says, loud enough for the surrounding rows to hear, because whatever happens next, she wants witnesses, always wants witnesses, has wanted witnesses, since the moment she decided this man didn't belong. "I was thinking about what you said earlier. About missing your row." Elijah doesn't move. "Maybe you were right." Her voice has a sweetness to it now. Wrong sweetness. The kind that tastes like sugar poured over something already gone bad. "Maybe I did owe you a drink." She tilts the bottle. There's no glass under it. The champagne doesn't land in anything. It pours, not splashes, pours, a steady deliberate stream, directly, onto the plain fabric covering Elijah's chest. Straight down. Unhurried. Like she's watering something she wants to watch die. The cabin hears it before it sees it. A soft wet sound. Rain against fabric. Then the color spreads, gold blooming outward across dark cloth, an ugly beautiful stain climbing across his shirt, soaking down through the crease of his slacks, pooling finally in the leather seam, where his thigh meets the seat. The smell arrives a half-second later. Sharp. Sweet. $200 a bottle, soaking into a shirt worth 10 times that, and none of it, not $1 of it, mattering right now to anyone in this cabin except the woman holding the bottle, who is smiling. Elijah doesn't jump, doesn't shout, doesn't grab the bottle, or shove her hand away. Sits there, perfectly still. Champagne running down his chest, dripping off his belt buckle, pooling cold against his skin. And then, slowly, he turns his head. Looks at Vanessa Cole for the first time, since she told him he didn't belong here. His eyes are calm. Not angry. Not hurt. Not even surprised. He looks at her the way you look at someone who has just made the final, irreversible mistake of their career, and simply doesn't know it yet. Vanessa pulls the bottle back. She's smiling, the real kind, the kind that reaches the eyes, because whatever's left of her professionalism has fully surrendered to whatever twisted satisfaction she's drawing from this moment. Oops. A single drop hangs from the bottle's rim. Catches the amber light. Falls onto his knee. So sorry about that. She brushes a strand of hair behind her ear, with the hand still holding the bottle. Casual. Unbothered. Like she spilled water on a napkin, and not champagne on a human being sitting in a seat he paid for. But honestly, that shirt's probably seen worse. Hasn't it? The cabin doesn't gasp. A gasp is a reflex, quick and involuntary. What happens instead is slower. Heavier. Something closer to shame. The cream blazer woman presses a hand over her mouth. Not shock. Something worse than shock, the specific, sinking recognition of having watched something happen, and knowing, with total clarity, that she should have said something 5 minutes ago and didn't. The colonel sets his newspaper down entirely now. Rigid posture. Jaw locked. A man holding himself in place, through sheer force of discipline, because every instinct trained into him over 26 years of service is screaming at him to stand up, and every ounce of that same discipline is telling him to wait. Just a little longer. Wait for the moment that matters. 2 rows back, a quiet woman traveling alone reaches into her bag. Pulls out her phone. Starts recording. Her hands are shaking. Not from fear. From something closer to fury, the kind that needs an outlet, or it curdles into something worse. Within 30 seconds 2 more phones are up. And Walter Higgins stands. Not quickly. Not with any dramatic push off the armrest. He stands the way a man stands, when a decision has already been made, and he simply wants the room to know it. Adjusts his glasses. And now you have poured champagne on him. Deliberately. In full view of this entire cabin. He looks around at the others. At the phones now openly recording. I am a retired attorney. I spent 4 decades trying cases involving discrimination and civil rights violations. Another pause. What I just watched is one of the most blatant acts of racial discrimination I have witnessed in that entire career. And I have witnessed plenty. Vanessa's smile is gone now. Not all at once. It peels away slowly, like paint under sun. Sir? I already told you. This doesn't concern you. Walter removes his glasses. Cleans them, unhurried, with the pocket square, from his jacket. Ma'am. 6 of us are witnesses to this. At least 3 of them currently recording on their phones. He slides the glasses back on. And a victim, who hasn't spoken a single hostile word this entire flight. He sits back down. Crosses one leg over the other, deliberate, final. This concerns everyone. He's right about the phones. Frank Ostrander's phone is now propped against the folded newspaper, lens angled toward the aisle. The cream blazer woman is holding hers below the seat back screen, tilted upward, no longer pretending she's not filming. Vanessa sees all of it. Something shifts behind her eyes. The confidence doesn't collapse. Not yet. But it cracks. A hairline fracture that hasn't finished spreading. Put those away, she says. Recording on an aircraft is against. It isn't, Walter says without looking up. The cabin settles into a different kind of silence now. Not frozen. Something rawer. The silence of people who have just quietly, individually, decided which side of this they're standing on. Elijah feels the champagne going cold against his skin. The fabric has soaked through completely now, gold darkening to something closer to brown, where it's saturated deepest. A little of it has pooled, where his thigh meets the seam of the seat. Cold. Sticky. Wrong. The smell of it, sweet, expensive, and underneath all that, something that just smells like humiliation, sits in his chest. He thinks of his mother again. Baby. The people who try to make you small already know you're bigger than them. That's why they're trying. He's waiting. Still hasn't moved. Shirt ruined. Slacks damp in a pattern that looks, absurdly, like a map of somewhere nobody would ever choose to go. Hands still folded. Breathing still even. But underneath the armrest, away from the phones, away from the eyes, away from Vanessa Cole's satisfied little smile, his right hand moves. Slides toward his phone. Thumb against the screen. Unlocks it. Scrolls, without looking down, to a name he doesn't have to search for, because it's the first name in his recent calls, always has been, the person he trusts to answer at any hour, with no preamble, and no wasted breath. He presses call. The phone rings twice. And somewhere in a different city, on a different floor, in an office that never fully goes dark, someone picks up. No hello. Just silence on the line. Waiting for whoever called to speak first. Denise? Elijah says. Quiet. Level. The same voice he's used all night, the voice of a man who could be reading a grocery list, except now that voice is about to end 3 careers, before this plane ever reaches the ground. It's me. And on the other end of the line, Denise Farrow's expression changes completely, because in 4 years of working under Elijah Monroe, she's heard him call from a personal cell phone mid-flight exactly once before. And she already knows, before he says another word, that whatever's about to come out of his mouth is going to be very, very bad for somebody. She just doesn't know yet how bad. She's about to find out. 23 years in corporate aviation taught Denise Farrow that greetings cost time, and time costs money, and money is the only language that never lies to you. So when the screen on her desk phone lit up, with a name she wasn't expecting, a personal cell, not the emergency line, not the crisis line, but Elijah's actual private number, she'd picked up on the second ring, and said nothing at all. Waited. Because if he's calling this number, at this hour, mid-flight, she already knows the shape of what's coming even before she knows the details. It's happened exactly once before. A gate agent in Dallas. A wheelchair. A veteran who waited 40 minutes, because somebody decided he wasn't worth the extra 5 it would have taken to help him board with dignity. That agent was terminated, before the plane he was supposed to be working even pushed back from the gate. Denise. It's me. I know it's you. She'd said. Talk. I'm on flight 2261. Atlanta to LaGuardia. I know. I approved the manifest myself. Her fingers were already moving across the keyboard, pulling up the crew roster, before he'd finished the sentence, because that's the job, that's always been the job, anticipate, don't react. What happened? Not a question. A demand disguised as one. Lead flight attendant refused me service. His voice hadn't changed. Not 1 degree. He could have been reading a weather report. Told me I didn't belong in first class. Called me a thief. A freeloader. Wiped down the armrest, after touching my boarding pass like I'd left something on it. Denise stopped typing. Then she poured a full bottle of champagne on me. Deliberately. In front of the entire cabin. 3 seconds of silence on the line. In corporate America, 3 seconds of silence from a COO usually means somebody's about to lose their job. 3 seconds of silence from Denise Farrow specifically means somebody's about to lose their job, their severance, their reference letter, and any realistic chance of working in commercial aviation again for the rest of their natural life. Say that again, she'd said. Not because she didn't hear him. Because some part of her needed to hear it twice, before she let herself believe it. He'd said it again. Same words. Same flat, level delivery, like the horror of it hadn't fully caught up to his voice yet, because it was too busy sitting in his chest, cold, where the champagne already was. Name: Vanessa Cole. Her fingers moved across the keyboard again, faster now, the sound of it sharp and rhythmic through the phone like something mechanical waking up. Lead flight attendant, first class. A pause while the screen loaded. 12 years with the airline. Another pause, this one longer, this one with something underneath it that sounded almost like dread. Elijah. What? There are 2 others working that cabin tonight. Her voice had changed. Just slightly. The efficiency was still there, but something had crept in underneath it, something that sounded almost like she was bracing for a second impact she hadn't identified the source of yet. Nathan Price. 2 years. And... she'd stopped. And? Renee Castillo. 3 years. I want their names off the crew system before we land, he'd said. You'll have it in 10 minutes. Make it 5. The line had gone dead. That was 30 minutes ago. Now Denise Farrow sits alone in a conference room 2 floors below Preston Vale's office, 3 complaint files spread across the table in front of her, and she has not moved in what feels like a very long time. Because the first flag came up almost immediately, after she pulled Vanessa Cole's full personnel record. A complaint. Filed 8 years ago. A passenger, the name redacted, some old privacy policy nobody ever bothered to update, alleging discriminatory treatment during boarding. Status: resolved. No further action. She'd stared at that phrase for a moment. Resolved. No further action. 2 words that, in her experience, usually means somebody in a windowless room decided it was cheaper and easier to make a problem disappear than to actually look at it. Clicked further. A second complaint. 5 years ago. Different passenger. Similar language. Different flight, same accusation, dismissive treatment, differential service, a passenger who felt singled out, and said so in writing. Status: resolved. No further action. Her stomach had turned. Slowly. The way it does, when you're standing on solid ground, and suddenly aren't sure anymore. A third. 2 years ago. This one had more detail. This one had a name attached, unredacted, because whoever filed it insisted on it, insisted on being seen, insisted on the record showing exactly who they were, and exactly what happened to them. She'd read it twice. The same pattern. Almost word for word. A passenger treated as suspect on sight. A boarding pass handled like evidence in a crime scene. An apology issued not to the passenger, but to corporate, 3 sentences long, signed off by a name she recognized immediately, because it belongs to somebody 2 floors above her own office. Preston Vale. Board member. Senior enough that his signature on a document usually means the document stops moving. Which is exactly what happened here. 3 complaints. 3 separate passengers. 3 separate incidents spread across 5 years, and every single one of them died in the same place. A file marked resolved, sitting in a system nobody was required to review, unless they went looking. And nobody went looking. Because looking costs time, and time costs money, and somewhere along the way somebody decided a 12-year veteran, with excellent customer satisfaction scores in every other category, wasn't worth the paperwork it would take to actually deal with the pattern underneath those scores. She sits back in her chair now. Because this isn't just Vanessa Cole anymore. This is bigger than one woman on one flight pouring champagne on one man's lap. This is a company that had 3 separate chances to see this coming, 3 separate warnings sitting in a database, and chose, actively, repeatedly, by a signature belonging to someone whose office is 2 floors above hers, to bury every single one of them. 2 people from legal sit across from her. A man named Doyle, sharp-eyed and quiet, and a woman, whose surname happens to be Castillo, unrelated to the flight attendant sharing it, though the coincidence isn't lost on either of them, when someone mentions it. Neither has said much in the last 10 minutes. Both have been reading. This signature, Doyle says finally, tapping the bottom of the third complaint. Is on all three. I know, Denise says. You know what this means, right? If this goes public the way it's shaping up to. I know what it means. Her voice is flat. Tired. 23 years of protecting this company from itself, and this is the first time she's ever felt the ground actually shift under the practice of doing that job well. It means Preston Vale used his position on this board to bury a pattern of discrimination 3 separate times, because dealing with it honestly would have cost the company more in the short term than covering it up did. And Monroe knows about the flight. Monroe's about to know everything. She looks up. This isn't going to be a conversation about one flight attendant anymore. Nobody says anything for a moment. Because all three of them understand, sitting in that room, with those 3 files spread across the table, that whatever happens on the tarmac tonight, whatever happens to Vanessa Cole, to Nathan Price, to Renee Castillo, is only going to be the first domino. There's a much bigger one standing behind it. And it has a name. Back in the cabin, the 10 minutes Elijah gave Denise are ticking down in real time, though nobody in first class knows a clock is running at all. Vanessa has retreated behind the galley curtain again. Arms crossed. That same rigid posture she's been holding, since Walter Higgins tore her script in half in front of everyone. Nathan is beside her, not restocking anything now, just standing there, hands empty, face pale in a way that has nothing to do with the cabin lighting. He's calling someone, Nathan says. Quiet. Almost to himself. Let him call. Vanessa's voice is sharp enough to cut. But there's something underneath the sharpness now. A tremor. Small. The kind you only hear if you're listening for it, and Nathan is listening for it, because he's spent 2 years learning exactly what her voice sounds like, when she's certain, and this isn't that sound anymore. Who's he going to call? A lawyer? She almost laughs. Good luck. It's his word against mine. And I've got 12 years of a spotless record. Vanessa. The old guy said people were recording. People are always recording. Doesn't mean anything. She slams a tray of glasses into the overhead rack, harder than necessary, the sound of it sharp in the small space. I've had passengers threaten to sue me. 6 times. 6. She holds up a fist, fingers curled. Want to know how many lawsuits actually happened? She opens the fist. Empty palm. 0. Nobody follows through. They land, they go home, they forget about it by Tuesday. Trust me. Nathan doesn't look convinced. He glances at the gap in the curtain. Through it, he can see the back of Elijah's head, still composed, still facing the window like none of the last 20 minutes ever happened. There's something about that stillness that turns Nathan's stomach in a way he can't quite name. Not because it feels threatening. Because it feels patient. The kind of patient that belongs to somebody who doesn't need to rush anything, because the outcome's already decided, and all that's left now is waiting for everyone else to catch up to it. What if he's somebody? Nathan says. Somebody. Vanessa lets out a short, brittle laugh. Nathan. Look at him. Does he look like somebody to you? Nathan doesn't answer. Because the honest answer is yes. Something about the way this man sat in a champagne-soaked shirt, unmoving, uncomplaining, without a single crack showing anywhere, that isn't the behavior of a man who's been defeated. That's the behavior of a man who's waiting for something specific to arrive, and knows exactly how long it's going to take. Nathan's father was a carpenter. Quiet man. The kind who measured 3 times, and cut once, who never raised his voice at a client, who insulted his work, who just nodded, packed his tools, and left without another word. And every single time, that client called back, within a week. Because silence from a man who actually knows what he's doing is louder than any argument you could throw at him. Nathan looks through the curtain gap one more time. Elijah is still. Hands still folded. Breathing still even. But there's a heaviness in his posture now that Nathan didn't notice before. Not defeat. Something closer to gravity. The kind that pulls everything in a room toward it eventually, whether the room wants it to or not. Vanessa. His voice is barely above a whisper now. I think we should stop. Stop what? All of it. Leave him alone. Serve him the champagne. Apologize before this gets. Before this gets what, Nathan? She snaps the tray shut, with a metallic clang. I'm not apologizing to a man who doesn't belong in my cabin. End of discussion. He closes his mouth. And for the second time tonight, chooses to follow orders he already knows are wrong. Which is, in its own quiet way, exactly the thing that's about to end his career too, not because he threw the champagne, not because he said the words. Because he stood 2 feet away, and watched somebody else do it, and did nothing, and knew the entire time it was wrong. Silence isn't neutral. He's going to learn that lesson tonight in a way he's never going to forget. Colonel Frank Ostrander has not said a single word since the champagne hit Elijah's shirt. He's been sitting there in 3A, spine straight, hands flat against his thighs, watching everything with the specific, disciplined stillness of a man trained across 26 years of service to hold his position, until the exact moment his position needs to change. He knows that moment is coming. Feels it building the way you feel weather change in an old wound. Because he's seen this before. Not on a plane. On a tarmac. 43 years ago, give or take, standing in a uniform he'd earned the hard way, standing at a counter not so different from this one, being told, politely, the way people are always, so unbearably polite about it, that there'd been some kind of mix-up, with his reservation that perhaps he'd be more comfortable waiting for the next available flight. There'd been no mix-up. He knew it then. Knows it now. Knew it the way you know weather is coming, before the sky admits it, some old animal instinct, that doesn't need proof to be certain. He didn't say anything that day. Stood there. Let it happen. Took the next flight, 6 hours later, and told himself the whole time that dignity meant not making a scene, that his service meant something even if the man behind that counter couldn't see it, that someday the country he wore that uniform for would catch up to the version of itself it kept promising to become. 43 years. And here he is. Watching it happen again. Different decade. Different uniform. No uniform at all now, just a cardigan, and reading glasses, and a body that doesn't move the way it used to. But the same exact posture in the man across the aisle. The same folded hands. The same stillness, that isn't peace, that's discipline, that's a man teaching himself in real time not to give anyone the satisfaction of watching him break. Frank Ostrander is done watching this happen, without saying anything. He waited 43 years for someone else to say something the first time it happened to him. Nobody ever did. He's not going to make Elijah Monroe wait that long. The captain's voice comes through the overhead speakers, calm and routine, something about their position over South Carolina, nothing that matters, nothing anybody in first class is actually listening to. Vanessa steps back into the cabin. Champagne bottle set down now, back on the cart, back where it belongs, like nothing happened, like the stains still spreading across Elijah's shirt is somehow separate from her, unconnected, an accident that occurred in the vicinity of her hands rather than because of them. She busies herself at the cart, straightening glasses that don't need straightening. Walter watches her. Frank watches her. And Elijah, still facing the window, still perfectly, unnervingly still, feels his phone buzz once against the armrest. A text. He turns it face up just enough to read it. Denise, confirmed. 3 prior complaints, all matching pattern. All marked resolved by same signature. Sending full file now. This is bigger than tonight, Elijah. He reads it twice. Feels something shift in his chest, that isn't anger exactly. Something colder than anger. Something closer to recognition, the specific, sick feeling of watching a suspicion you already half believed turn into a documented fact. Because tonight isn't an accident. Tonight isn't one bad employee having one bad night. Tonight is the visible tip of something that's been sitting under the surface of his own company for years, protected, buried, signed off by somebody whose office sits 2 floors above the one running this investigation right now. He sets the phone back down. Doesn't say anything. Not yet. Walter Higgins has been quietly reading the room the entire time. Not the cabin, the room, in the older sense, the sense a trial attorney uses, when he means the emotional temperature of everyone, within reach of his voice. And he's noticed something. The way Nathan Price keeps glancing toward row 2, and then away again, fast, guilty, like a man who's swallowed something he can't quite keep down. Walter's spent 40 years learning to read that particular expression. It's the look of somebody who knows more than they're saying. He waits until Vanessa moves further up the cabin, refilling a glass nobody asked her to refill, before he leans slightly toward the aisle. Catches Nathan's eye, as the young man passes, with an empty tray. Son! Nathan stops. Doesn't want to. Stops anyway, because something in the old man's voice carries the specific gravity of somebody who isn't going to let you keep walking. You've worked with her a while. 2 years. Nathan's voice is barely above a whisper. This the first time you've seen her do something like this? Nathan's mouth opens. Closes. Opens again. And here, right here, in this exact silence, is where the third turn of the night arrives, quiet and devastating, delivered not with a shout, but with the particular, halting honesty of a young man who's been carrying something heavy for longer than he wanted to admit even to himself. No, he says. Walter doesn't move. Doesn't blink. Just waits, the way he's waited out 1,000 witnesses across 40 years, understanding that silence pulls the truth out of people faster than any question ever could. There was a flight. Couple months back. Nathan's voice is shaking now, just slightly. A man. Older. Nice suit. He stops. Swallows. She did something similar. Not the champagne. But the tone. The accusations. I was standing right there. And I recorded it. The words come out fast now, like he's been holding them behind his teeth for months, and the dam just gave. On my phone. I don't even know why. Instinct, I guess. I felt like something was wrong, and I wanted proof of it, in case. In case what? In case nobody believed him. Nathan's eyes are wet now. I never showed anyone. Never reported it. I told myself it wasn't my place. Told myself I needed this job, that she'd make my life hell, if I said anything, that maybe I was reading too much into it. He shakes his head. I've had that recording sitting on my phone for 2 months. I never did anything with it. Walter absorbs this, without a flicker of surprise on his face. 40 years in courtrooms taught him that too, never let a witness see how much their answer just changed everything. Why are you telling me this now? Nathan looks toward row 2. Toward the man sitting there in a ruined shirt, still, silent, waiting. Because I think it's about to matter, he says. And I think I've been a coward long enough. He walks away before Walter can respond. Back toward the galley. Back toward Vanessa, who hasn't noticed the conversation, who's too busy performing composure to see the ground shifting under her feet. Walter watches him go. Then looks across the aisle. Catches Frank Ostrander's eye. Something passes between the two older men. Unspoken. A kind of agreement forged in half a second of eye contact, the way certain understandings only ever pass between men who've lived long enough to recognize a moment, when it arrives. It's time. Frank Ostrander stands. Doesn't announce it. Doesn't clear his throat first, doesn't ask permission, doesn't do any of the small performative things people do, before they say something important. Just rises from seat 3A the way he's risen, from 1,000 formations, over 26 years, straight-backed, deliberate, a man whose body still remembers what discipline feels like even decades removed, from the uniform that trained it. The cabin turns toward him. Vanessa freezes at the cart, halfway through pouring a glass nobody wanted. Ma'am, Frank says. His voice is low. Steady. Carries the particular weight of a man who's spent a career giving orders, and having them followed, though there's no anger in it, not yet, just a kind of tired gravity that's heavier than shouting could ever be. I'm 71 years old. Retired colonel. 26 years of service to a country that, more than once, made it very clear it didn't consider that service equal to the man standing next to me. He pauses. Lets that land? 43 years ago, I stood at a ticket counter not unlike the one you work behind. In uniform. Medals on my chest I'd bled for. And I was told, politely, the way people are always so unbearably polite about it, that there'd been some kind of mix-up with my reservation. That perhaps I'd be more comfortable waiting 6 hours for the next flight. His jaw tightens. There was no mix-up. The cabin is dead silent now. Even the hum of the engine seems to fade under the weight of his voice. I didn't say anything that day. Told myself dignity meant staying quiet. Told myself the country would catch up eventually to the uniform I was wearing. His eyes moved to Elijah, still turned toward the window, still listening to every single word. I have spent 43 years waiting for somebody to say something the first time this happened to me. He looks back at Vanessa. Nobody ever did. His voice doesn't rise. It doesn't need to. I am not going to make the same mistake twice in one lifetime. Vanessa's mouth opens. Nothing comes out. You poured that man a drink of judgment before you ever poured him champagne, Frank says. You decided who he was the second you saw him, and everything since then has just been you finding reasons to be right about a decision you made in under 10 seconds. That's not instinct, ma'am. That's prejudice wearing a uniform. I recognize the shape of it. I've been on the other side of it my whole life. He sits back down. Doesn't wait for a response. Doesn't need one. The cabin holds its breath around him. And this is the moment, this exact one, with Frank Ostrander settling back into his seat, and the whole first-class cabin still ringing, with the weight of what he just said, that Walter Higgins decides it's his turn. He stands. Slower than Frank did. Older joints, longer career of sitting behind desks instead of standing at attention. But his presence fills the aisle the same way, unhurried, absolute. Ms. Cole. Vanessa turns to him. Something in her face has changed in the last 2 minutes. The confidence isn't fully gone yet, but it's thinning, stretched over something underneath that's starting to show through. I have a question for you, Walter says. And I'd like you to actually answer it, rather than tell me it's none of my concern. Sir, I really don't think. When did you decide he was a thief? The question lands like a dropped glass. Vanessa blinks. What? When did you decide it? Was it before he handed you his boarding pass? Because you never actually looked at it. I watched you. Held it up arm's length, like it might bite you. Never once glanced at the seat number printed on it. Walter's voice doesn't rise, doesn't need to, 40 years of cross-examination sitting behind every syllable. So the decision was made, before the evidence arrived. Which means the evidence was never going to change your mind. Which means, Ms. Cole, that this was never actually about a boarding pass at all. That's not. Was it the sweater? Silence. Was it that he didn't come dressed the way you expected a first-class passenger to dress? Was it his skin? Was it something you can't even fully name, some reflex you've had, so long you stopped noticing it was a reflex at all? He takes a step closer, close enough that his voice doesn't need to carry, close enough that it lands like something private even, though the whole cabin can hear it. Because I've spent 40 years asking people exactly this kind of question. And in my experience, ma'am, the people who answer fastest are usually the ones with the least to hide. And the people who go quiet, the way you've just gone quiet, those are usually the ones who already know the answer and don't want to say it out loud. Vanessa's hands are trembling now. Small. Barely visible. But visible enough. I've worked 12 years, she says, and her voice cracks slightly in the middle of the sentence. 12 years, building a reputation, and you're standing here trying to turn one moment into. One moment? Walter's eyebrows lift. Ms. Cole, we've just been told, by your own colleague, that this isn't the first time. That there's a recording on a phone somewhere of you doing something remarkably similar to a different passenger months ago. He pauses. Would you like to keep calling it one moment? Vanessa's eyes dart toward the galley. Toward Nathan, who is standing frozen behind the curtain, unable to meet her gaze. You told him, she says. Voice low. Almost a whisper. Betrayal sitting heavy in every syllable. He told the truth. Walter says. There's a difference, though I understand it might not feel that way to you right now. He returns to his seat. Sits. Crosses one leg over the other, with the same deliberate finality he's used all flight. I don't need you to confess to anything, Ms. Cole. I've spent enough of my career watching people incriminate themselves in real time to know I don't need a confession. I just needed you to answer one honest question in front of witnesses. He looks at her, over the rim of his glasses. And you couldn't. Vanessa doesn't say anything for a long moment. Stands there, card in front of her, glass in hand, champagne bottle nearly empty on the shelf beside her, and for the first time all evening, something like doubt moves across her face. Not remorse yet. Not quite. But doubt. The specific, unfamiliar sensation of watching your own certainty come apart in front of an audience you can't control. She wants to say something. Opens her mouth. But nothing comes. Because that's the terrible part of being finally, publicly cornered by the truth. You spend so long building the story that justifies you, brick by brick, excuse by excuse, 12 years of telling yourself you know an upgrade scam, when you see one, that you know a thief's face, that your instincts have earned the right to overrule an actual boarding pass, and then someone stands up, calmly, without raising his voice even once, and takes the whole structure apart in under 2 minutes. And there's nothing left standing under it. She turns away. Pushes the cart back toward the galley, faster than she needs to, the wheels squeaking against the aisle carpet. Nathan is waiting there. Won't meet her eyes. You didn't have to tell him, she says. I did, actually. Nathan's voice is quiet, but steady, steadier than it's been all flight, like something in him finally settled into place the moment the words left his mouth. I've been carrying that for 2 months, Vanessa. 2 months of telling myself it wasn't my place. It was my place. I just didn't want it to be. So what? You just threw me under the bus. No. He shakes his head. You did that yourself. About an hour ago. With a bottle of champagne. She doesn't have an answer for that. Behind the curtain, in the small enclosed space of the galley, where nobody in the cabin can see either of their faces, the two of them stand in silence, and for the first time, since this flight began, Vanessa Cole looks less like a woman defending her territory, and more like a woman who's just realized the ground under her feet was never as solid as she thought it was. Elijah's phone buzzes again. Denise, full file compiled. Sending to you and legal now. You need to see this before we land. It's not just her. There's a signature on all 3 closed complaints that's going to be a problem for us at a much higher level. He reads it. Feels his stomach tighten in a way that has nothing to do with the champagne still cooling against his skin. Higher level. He knows exactly what that phrase means in the context of his own company. There are only so many signatures that qualify as a higher level, and fewer still that would make Denise Farrow, a woman who has never in 4 years understated a problem to make his day easier, choose that specific phrase. He types back a single word. Who? The response takes 11 seconds. He counts them, watching the little dots pulse on the screen, feeling something cold settle into the base of his spine. Denise Preston Vale. He stares at the name. Preston Vale. Board member. 22 years on the Sterling Wing board, going back to before Elijah's father ever set foot inside a hangar, back when the company was still small enough that Vale's signature meant something closer to trust than power. Elijah's jaw tightens. Because there's a version of tonight that ends simply: a bad employee, a bad decision, a swift and clean termination, before the plane even lands. That version was always going to be satisfying in its own small, contained way. This isn't that version anymore. This is a version where somebody 2 floors above his own office decided, 3 separate times across 5 years, that burying a pattern of discrimination was more convenient than confronting it. And Elijah is starting to understand, sitting here in a ruined shirt at 37,000 feet, that whatever happens to Vanessa Cole tonight is only the visible part of something much larger sitting underneath the surface of the company that carries his name. He closes his eyes. Thinks of his mother again. 31 years of scrubbing other people's stains out of carpets nobody thanked her for cleaning. And then, unbidden, he thinks of his father. A name he doesn't let himself think about often. Not because it hurts exactly. Because it's the kind of hurt that doesn't get smaller, with time, just quieter, tucked further back, where it doesn't interrupt the day-to-day of running an airline that carries a version of the family name forward in ways nobody outside his mother ever knew. His father worked baggage handling. A regional carrier, long since folded into something bigger. 20 years of loading and unloading other people's luggage, 20 years of watching younger, less experienced men promoted over him for reasons nobody ever wrote down honestly, 20 years of being told, in 100 small polite ways, that he'd reached the ceiling that had been built for him before he ever walked through the door. He died before Elijah bought his first airplane. Never saw a single mile of what his son built. Elijah doesn't know it yet, not fully, not with the documentation that's about to land in his inbox before the week is out. But the regional carrier his father worked for was absorbed into a larger holding company 9 years ago. A holding company Sterling Wing acquired 18 months after that. He doesn't know that yet. He will. Soon. And when he does, the fight he's about to have with Preston Vale is going to feel less like corporate housekeeping, and more like something closer to inheritance. But right now, in this exact second, all he knows is a name, Preston Vale, sitting on his phone screen like a stone dropped into still water, and the slow, spreading understanding that tonight was never just about one woman and one bottle of champagne. It was always going to be bigger than that. The seatbelt sign chimes on. Descent has begun. The captain's voice, still smooth, still routine, announces their approach into LaGuardia, current weather, local time, the small mechanical comforts of a flight, that is, from the outside, ending exactly the way 10,000 other flights end every single day. Nobody in first class is thinking about the weather. Vanessa stands rigid near the galley, hands clasped in front of her, staring at nothing. The performance has drained out of her completely now. What's left is something rawer, a woman standing at the edge of a cliff she built herself, one brick at a time, over 12 years, without ever once looking down to check how high she'd climbed. Nathan won't look at her. Renee Castillo, who has said almost nothing all flight, who stood behind that curtain and watched everything happen, without lifting a finger to stop it, keeps glancing toward the cabin like she's hoping, somehow, that none of this actually happened, that she'll step off this plane in 20 minutes, and none of it will have left a mark. It will. Walter Higgins closes his book, properly this time, bookmark tucked neatly into place, and sets it in the seat pocket in front of him. Looks across the aisle at Frank Ostrander. The 2 men exchange a small nod. Nothing needs to be said between them. Everything that needed saying has already been said out loud, in front of witnesses, in front of phones that are still, even now, quietly recording. Elijah looks down at his shirt. Ruined. Cold. Sticking uncomfortably to his skin in places where the champagne pooled deepest. He thinks, for just a second, about how strange it is that a man can own an entire airline, every seat, every bottle and every galley cart, every uniform hanging in every crew closet across the country, and still end up sitting in a puddle of somebody else's contempt at 30,000 feet, with nothing to do but wait. But waiting has never been weakness. His mother taught him that a long time ago, at a kitchen table in Memphis, hands cracked from bleach, voice steady even when her body wasn't. The truth always shows up. It's showing up now. In the form of a phone buzzing quietly in his palm. In the form of a name, Preston Vale, that's about to change the shape of a fight he didn't know he was walking into when he boarded this plane 2 hours ago. The plane begins its descent. Below, the lights of New York start to bloom, through the cloud cover, scattered in gold, spreading out toward the horizon like something spilled. Vanessa Cole watches those same lights, through the small oval window near the galley, and for the first time all night, her hands aren't steady at all. Back in the cabin, the wheels are almost down. Elijah sits perfectly still, watching the ground rise up to meet them, through the window, city lights sharpening, from soft blur, into individual, separate points, each one its own small story happening somewhere below, unaware that any of this is unfolding 37,000 feet above their evening. Walter watches him. There's something he wants to say. Has wanted to say for the last 20 minutes, ever since he stood up and dismantled Vanessa Cole's story in front of the entire cabin. But he waits. Because some things need the right moment, and the right moment, for a man like Walter Higgins, has never once been the loud one. He waits until the wheels actually touch down. Until the shutter runs through the cabin, and the overhead bins rattle, and the seatbelt sign clicks off for the last time this flight. Then he leans slightly across the aisle. Mr. Monroe. Elijah turns. First time he's really looked at Walter directly all flight. I don't know your name yet, Walter says. But I suspect, given how that phone call sounded, that by the time we're off this aircraft, everyone else will. A faint, tired almost smile touches the corner of Elijah's mouth. First one all night. Elijah Monroe. Walter nods slowly, like something's confirming itself in his mind, some suspicion crystallizing into certainty. Sterling Wing, he says. Not a question. Sterling Wing. Walter sits back. Looks out his own window at the gate lights sliding into view, the ground crew already gathering near the jet bridge in a formation that looks, even from up here, distinctly more formal than the usual arrival crew. Well, he says quietly, almost to himself. This is about to get very interesting. Frank Ostrander, across the aisle, doesn't say anything. Just gives a single, small nod, the kind exchanged between men who've both, in their own separate decades, waited a very long time for a moment exactly like this one to finally arrive. Outside the window, through the gathering dark, 2 black SUVs sit parked near the gate. Unmarked. Denise ordered them the moment she hung up with Elijah, before she'd even opened the first complaint file, because some decisions don't wait for evidence. They wait for authority, and Elijah had already given her that. The plane taxis toward the gate. And behind the galley curtain, Vanessa Cole stands, with her hands pressed flat against the counter, staring at nothing, listening to the wheels roll to a stop beneath her, understanding, finally, fully, 12 years too late, that whatever waits for her on the other side of that door is not going to be anything she can talk her way out of. The jet bridge connects with a dull thud. That sound again. Metal against metal. The same sound that happens on every flight, every gate, every single day at every airport in the country. Except tonight it doesn't sound routine. Tonight it sounds like a verdict being read. The door opens. Cold air rushes in first. Then the noise of the terminal beyond it, announcements, rolling luggage, 1,000 ordinary lives moving in 1,000 ordinary directions. And then the men in dark suits. 4 of them. 2 from HR. 2 from legal. Standing just beyond the threshold in a straight, silent line, the kind of formation that doesn't happen by accident. Because it didn't. Denise Farrow arranged every inch of it the second Elijah's call ended, the SUVs already rolling, before she'd read a single complaint file, the paperwork catching up to the decision instead of the other way around. Captain Desmond Rourke steps out first. 26 years flying commercial aircraft. Engine failures. Medical emergencies. A bomb threat over the Pacific in his 9th year, that he still won't talk about at dinner parties. His pulse has never gone above 80 in any of those moments. Right now it's sitting at 94. He'd read the directive from headquarters 3 times before he stood up. Not twice. 3. Because the first 2 times some old, stubborn part of him refused to believe he'd read it correctly. He hadn't misread anything. He turns back toward the cabin. Toward Vanessa Cole, who's already stepped out, from behind the galley curtain, with her chin lifted, her scarf still knotted, her name badge still catching the light, still, even now, performing the version of herself that's been getting her, through the last 12 years. Ms. Cole. Captain, thank you for coming out. Her voice is bright. Rehearsed. The voice of a woman who's already decided how this conversation is supposed to go, who's already cast herself as the reasonable professional handling an unreasonable passenger. The gentleman in 2A has been. Please stop talking. He doesn't raise his voice. Doesn't need to. 26 years of authority sit behind every syllable, and something in the flatness of it lands harder than shouting ever could. Her mouth stays open half a second longer than it should. Then closes. The captain steps fully into the cabin. Looks at each passenger in turn, the woman in 1A, lowering her phone at last. The colonel in 3A, still seated, still upright, watching everything with the patient stillness of a man who has waited 43 years for exactly this. Walter Higgins in 3B, glasses pushed up, arms crossed, the posture of a man waiting for a jury to return. Then his eyes find Elijah. The champagne stain. Dried now at the edges, dark and unmistakable against the fabric. The wet patch still visible on the leather seat beneath him. The folded napkin sitting on the armrest like evidence nobody's bothered to collect. Captain Rourke takes a breath. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption. His voice fills the cabin the way a captain's voice always does, calm, measured, built to hold the room, without overwhelming it. I've just received a directive from Sterling Wing headquarters regarding the conduct of the cabin crew on this flight. Vanessa's chin is still up. Still performing. Still certain, somewhere beneath the tremor she can't quite hide, that whatever he's about to say is going to end with her being right, and the man in 2A being escorted off in handcuffs. Effective immediately, Rourke says. The following crew members are suspended from duty, pending investigation. He looks down at the tablet in his hand. Vanessa Cole. Lead flight attendant. He looks up at her directly when he says it. Watches something behind her eyes flicker, refuse, flicker again. Nathan Price. Flight attendant. Nathan, still standing near the galley curtain, doesn't react at all. Just closes his eyes for a second, like a man accepting a sentence he already knew was coming. Renee Castillo. Flight attendant. Renee's hand goes to her mouth. She hasn't said a single word all flight. Hasn't poured a drop, hasn't uttered an insult, hasn't done anything except stand behind a curtain and watch a woman she worked beside for 3 years pour a bottle of champagne onto a man's lap and say nothing. That silence has a price too. She's about to learn exactly what it costs. Vanessa lets out a short, disbelieving laugh. The kind people make when their brain rejects something before their mouth can catch up. Captain, you can't be serious. I am completely serious, Ms. Cole. On whose authority? Her voice cracks upward, sharp, panicked now in a way she can't fully control. I've been with this airline 12 years. 12? You can't just. On the authority, Rourke says, of the CEO and majority owner of Sterling Wing Airlines. He turns to Elijah. Mr. Monroe. I want to personally apologize on behalf of this crew and this airline. The name lands on the cabin like a physical weight dropping through the floor. Monroe. CEO. Owner. Vanessa hears the words. They don't connect right away. Her brain is still running the old program, the one where she's right, where the man in 2A is exactly what she decided he was in the first 10 seconds she laid eyes on him, where 12 years of experience made her untouchable. That program crashes. In real time. In front of everyone. Her lips move first. A small, useless twitch, like she's trying to summon a language she's forgotten how to speak. Then her eyes widen, not with surprise exactly, but with something slower, colder, climbing up from somewhere underneath her stomach. Recognition. The kind that starts small, and spreads until it's rewritten every expression on your face. She looks at Elijah. Really looks at him. For the first time all flight. And she sees, finally, what she should have seen, from the very first second he sat down into a. Not the color of his skin. Not the casual sweater, the missing entourage, the assumptions she built in 10 seconds, and defended for the better part of an hour. She sees a man sitting in his own seat. On his own airplane. Breathing his own airline's recycled air, wearing his own airline's leather against the back of his legs, while she poured his own champagne onto his lap, and called him a thief in front of witnesses. Her knees don't buckle. That would be dramatic. Something worse happens instead. She simply deflates. The posture goes first. Then the chin. Then her hands, clasped so confidently in front of her a minute ago, come apart, and hang loose at her sides like they've forgotten what they were built to do. Mr. Monroe. Her voice is barely audible now. I didn't. I had no idea. Elijah doesn't look at her. Hasn't looked at her since the champagne hit his shirt, and he isn't going to start now. He turns to the captain instead. I'd like a glass of champagne. His voice hasn't changed all flight. Level. Calm. Unmoved by any of it, not the insult, not the stains still drying on his chest, not even this. And I'd like you to make sure none of these three touch a single glass, a single cart, or a single passenger on this aircraft again. Yes, sir. Immediately. Rourke walks to the galley himself. Retrieves the same bottle of Chateau Verlaine, the very one Vanessa used, as a weapon less than an hour ago. Pours a glass with steady hands. Carries it back to seat 2A, and hands it to Elijah Monroe, the way champagne should have been offered to him, from the very beginning. Elijah takes it. Raises it slightly. Not a toast. Not a celebration. Just an acknowledgement. One sip. Sets the glass on the armrest. Turns back toward the window. Behind him, Walter Higgins stands. Slowly, deliberately, he begins to clap. It starts with one pair of hands. Then Frank Ostrander joins him, rising to his feet the way soldiers rise, without hesitation, without needing to be asked twice. Then the woman in 1A. Then two more passengers further back, who watched the whole thing unfold on a stranger's phone screen streamed quietly to their own seats. The applause isn't polite. It isn't the kind you give at the end of a presentation. It's the kind that comes from somewhere lower in the chest. The kind that means something. Elijah doesn't turn around for it. Doesn't need to. Behind the galley curtain, Vanessa Cole slides down the wall, until she's sitting on the floor of a plane she'll never work another shift on, and cries. Not performance tears. Not the kind she might have used, an hour ago, to talk her way out of something. Real ones. Nathan stands beside her, staring at his own shoes, understanding, finally, all the way down, that 12 years of following somebody else's orders never once made him innocent. It only made him quiet. And quiet tonight turned out to cost him everything too. The wheels have stopped rolling at the gate. Flight 2261 has landed at 8:47 p.m. 17 minutes behind schedule, though nobody on board is thinking about the schedule anymore. The door opens. The jet bridge connects. And the passengers of first class begin to file out, one by one, into a terminal that has no idea what just happened 37,000 feet above it. Vanessa Cole walks out first. Not by choice. Captain Rourke instructed her to deplane ahead of the passengers, and she does, because there's nothing left in her to argue with. She walks down the jet bridge, with her vest still pressed sharp, her scarf still pinned exactly in place, her name badge still catching the fluorescent light overhead like nothing has changed. Everything has changed. She walks the way a person walks toward a sentencing. Slow. Careful. Like each step is something she has to consciously choose to take. Denise Farrow is waiting at the end of the bridge. Black blazer. Tablet in hand. An expression rehearsed for exactly this kind of moment, though nothing about tonight has felt routine to her either, not since she read the third complaint file an hour ago. Ms. Cole. Her voice is flat. Professional. Final. Your employment with Sterling Wing Airlines is terminated, effective immediately. Please surrender your crew identification and security badge. Vanessa's fingers tremble as she unclips the gold name badge from her vest. The one she's polished every single morning for 12 years. The one she showed to passengers who dared to question her authority, held up like proof of something that, it turns out, never actually meant what she thought it meant. She places it in Denise's open palm. It makes a small sound. Metal against skin. The kind of sound that shouldn't mean anything at all. Tonight, it means everything. Nathan Price goes next. He doesn't shake. Doesn't cry, not yet, not in front of anyone. Hands over his badge, with the blank, resigned expression of a man who always suspected, somewhere underneath the day-to-day of following orders, that this was exactly how it would end. He just didn't expect it to end tonight. Denise looks at him for a moment, before taking the badge. Something in her expression softens, just slightly. You told the attorney, she says. Not a question. Nathan nods. That matters, Denise says. It doesn't undo tonight. But it matters. A pause. You'll hear from us in a few days. About next steps. Nathan doesn't fully understand what she means by that. Not yet. He'll find out soon enough that the phrase next steps, coming from Denise Farrow, is about to mean something very different for him than it does for the woman standing 3 feet away, still gripping a manila envelope she hasn't opened yet. Renee Castillo is last. She opens her mouth to explain. To say something about how she never poured anything, never said a single cruel word, was only ever standing behind a curtain doing her job. Denise raises one hand. Renee closes her mouth. 3 badges. 3 careers. Collected in under 4 minutes on a jet bridge at LaGuardia, while ordinary passengers roll their carry-ons past, glancing over, already composing the story they're about to tell somebody the second they get a signal. Vanessa stands at the end of the jet bridge, manila envelope now in her hands. Separation paperwork. A confidentiality agreement. A termination notice printed on letterhead she used to be proud to represent. She holds it the way you'd hold a medical result you're afraid to open. Passengers file past. Most don't look at her. A few do. The woman from 1A walks by, without a word, but slows, just for a second, long enough for Vanessa to feel the specific, silent weight of it. Frank Ostrander passes next. Doesn't stop. Doesn't say anything either. Just looks at her, once, directly, the way a man looks at something he recognizes, from a long time ago, and hoped, foolishly, he'd never have to see again in his lifetime. Walter Higgins is behind him. He does stop. Ms. Cole. She looks up. Something in her face braces for another blow. I want you to understand something, Walter says. And I want you to actually hear it, not just wait for me to finish talking. His voice isn't cruel. It's worse than cruel. It's calm. What happened tonight wasn't a mistake. Mistakes are things you didn't see coming. You saw this coming, from the moment he sat down. You just didn't think anyone was going to stop you. Vanessa doesn't answer. 12 years? Walter says. That's what you kept telling everyone tonight, like it was armor. 12 years should have taught you better than this. Instead, it just taught you how long you could get away with it. He walks on. Doesn't wait for a response. Because he doesn't need one. The woman who started recording first, the quiet one, the one nobody paid attention to all flight, stops in front of Vanessa on her way past. Doesn't say anything either. Just holds up her phone, screen facing outward, and plays 6 minutes and 42 seconds of footage. Every word. Every drop of champagne. Every deliberate wipe of that napkin against the armrest. Then she puts the phone away and keeps walking. Vanessa watches her go. The envelope crinkles in her grip. For the first time in 12 years, she has nothing left to say. No defense. No excuse. No spotless record to hide behind anymore. Just a woman standing alone on a jet bridge, holding the last piece of paper her career at Sterling Wing will ever produce. Elijah is the last to leave the aircraft. Champagne-stained shirt. Slacks still damp at the thigh. The Avro chronograph still ticking quietly under his sleeve, invisible the whole flight, irrelevant now. The 4 corporate representatives straighten as he approaches. Denise steps forward, opens her mouth to speak. He raises one hand. Not tonight. His voice is quiet. Tired in a way it hasn't been all evening. Meeting Monday. My office. 9 a.m. He walks past them. Through the terminal. Out to the curb, where a black car is already waiting, engine running, door open. He gets in. The door closes. And for a moment, sitting alone in the back seat, the city lights sliding past the window in long amber streaks, he lets himself finally exhale. The performance of stillness, the one he's been holding, since the second Vanessa Cole poured that bottle over his lap, cracks, just slightly, in the privacy of a car nobody else can see into. He closes his eyes. Thinks of his mother. The truth always shows up, baby. It just takes its time. It showed up tonight. But somewhere behind his closed eyes, a different thought is already forming, quieter, colder, and far from finished. A name. Preston Vale. 3 buried complaints. A signature that belongs 2 floors above the office, where this whole mess just got cleaned up. Monday is going to be a different kind of reckoning entirely. Monday, 9 a.m., a conference room on the 41st floor of Sterling Wing's Manhattan headquarters. Preston Vale sits at the head of the table when Elijah walks in. 68 years old. Silver hair combed the way it's been combed for 3 decades, the kind of confidence that comes from 22 years on a board and never once being asked to justify a decision out loud. That confidence is about to end. Elijah doesn't sit. Places 2 folders on the table. Slides the first toward Vale without a word. Vale opens it. Sees the 3 complaint files. Sees his own signature at the bottom of each one. His face doesn't move for a long moment. Elijah. Context matters here. These were handled appropriately at the time, given the... Given what? The question lands flat. Final. Vale doesn't have an answer ready. For the first time in 22 years on this board, he doesn't have an answer ready for anything. 3 passengers, Elijah says. 3 separate complaints. Same pattern every time. And every single time, you signed off on making it disappear instead of making it stop. He leans forward slightly. You had 3 chances to prevent Friday night. You buried every one of them. Elijah, I need you to understand the position I was in. I understand it perfectly. His voice doesn't rise. Doesn't need to. You decided a spotless quarterly report mattered more than 3 people, who were humiliated on our airplanes. And you did it quietly enough, that nobody above your signature ever had to know. He slides the second folder across the table. Vale opens it slower this time, some old instinct warning him, before his eyes even reach the page. Corporate acquisition records. A regional carrier, folded into a holding company 9 years ago. The same holding company Sterling Wing absorbed 18 months later, back when Elijah was still learning the difference between the airline his father worked for and the one he was about to build. A payroll ledger, 20 years deep, one name highlighted in yellow near the bottom of every single page. Denied. 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 20 years of a black baggage handler's promotion requests, stamped and filed, and quietly buried by men who never had to look him in the eye to say no. Elijah's father. I found this 3 days ago, Elijah says. His voice is steady. Barely. Buried in an acquisition file nobody thought I'd ever have a reason to open. My own father. 20 years. Never once promoted. Never once told why. Vale doesn't speak. You didn't do that to him, Elijah says. Somebody else did, in a different building, a long time, before you and I ever sat in a room together. But you built the same kind of building here. Signed the same kind of silence. 3 times that I know of. He straightens. I don't know how many more times there are, that I don't know about yet. He looks around at the rest of the board, silent, watching. That ends today. 2 weeks later, Sterling Wing Airlines announces a company-wide policy overhaul. Mandatory bias training for all 12,000 employees. Body cameras piloted across first-class cabin crews. An anonymous passenger hotline, staffed around the clock, routed directly to a compliance office that reports, by new charter, signed personally by Elijah Monroe, straight to the CEO's desk, with no board signature required to close a case. Preston Vale is no longer on the board. The announcement doesn't mention his name. Doesn't mention Vanessa Cole. Doesn't mention champagne, or a jet bridge at LaGuardia, or a manila envelope held like a medical result nobody wanted to open. Doesn't mention a payroll ledger, with one name highlighted 20 years deep. But everyone who reads it knows exactly where it came from. Nathan Price isn't fired after all. Denise Farrow personally reviews his file, weighs the 2 months he spent silent against the moment he finally chose not to be, and offers him something unexpected, a position building out the very bias training program the company just announced. A chance to spend the rest of his career making sure nobody else has to sit on a phone recording for 2 months, too afraid to speak. He takes it. Renee Castillo does not return to Sterling Wing. Some silences, it turns out, cost more than others. 6 weeks after the flight, on a quiet street in Connecticut, Walter Higgins sits on his porch, with a cup of coffee, and a legal thriller he's already 3 chapters ahead of solving. A car pulls up. Elijah Monroe steps out. No entourage. No stained sweater this time, just a plain gray coat, and the same quiet, unhurried presence he carried onto a plane 2 months ago. Walter had written him a letter. 2 pages, blue ink on cream stationery, mailed to Sterling Wing's headquarters addressed personally. An invitation. Nothing more. Elijah accepted. They eat roast chicken at a small kitchen table that's seen 40 years of dinners, 40 years of a man coming home from courtrooms with stories he couldn't always tell his family. They drink red wine. Not champagne. Neither of them suggests it, and neither of them needs to explain why. Frank Ostrander calls partway through dinner. Just to check in, he says, though everyone at that table knows it's more than that. Walter puts him on speaker for a few minutes. The 2 old men trade a few words, easy and warm in a way that surprises even them, 2 strangers who spent one evening on an airplane, and came out the other side of it something like brothers. After the call ends, Walter sets his fork down. You know what stays with me, he says, near the end of the night. Isn't the champagne. It's the 11 minutes before it. Elijah looks at him. 11 minutes, Walter says, where every single person in that cabin knew something was wrong. And every single one of us sat there deciding whether saying something was worth the discomfort of saying it. He turns his wine glass slowly by the stem. That's the part that should keep people up at night. Not her. Her we can fire. Us, the 6 of us, who almost didn't speak, that's harder to fix, with a policy memo. Elijah doesn't answer right away. Because there isn't an easy answer. There never was. My mother used to tell me the truth always shows up, he says finally. She never said anything about how long it takes, or how many people have to stay quiet, before somebody finally doesn't. Walter nods slowly. Understanding exactly what he means, in the particular way, that only happens between 2 men who've both spent a long time waiting for the world to catch up to something they already knew. Outside, the Connecticut evening settles into full dark. Somewhere back in New York, a training program bearing Nathan Price's fingerprints is already being built out floor by floor. Somewhere in Atlanta, a woman named Vanessa Cole is filling out job applications that keep asking her to explain a gap in her employment history she doesn't yet know how to write down honestly. And somewhere over the Atlantic seaboard tonight, another Sterling wing flight is climbing toward cruising altitude, carrying passengers who will never know how close they came to boarding the version of this airline that used to let things like that Friday night happen quietly and disappear. They won't have to know. That's the whole point.